I think he said I was from Merrill. That's correct. I own Maple Hollow. Many of you know me, but there's some, I'm sure, here that do not. My family started making maple syrup around 1889 near Merrill, Wisconsin. I am third generation. Jesse, what generation maple producer are you?
I don't know.
I've heard the story. It's 5 or 6. So he's the old guy. I'm the young guy at this. Technology is great, Jess. That one. Okay. First, think about your production goals, the number of gallons you're going to make. How many taps do you have to put out there to get that number of gallons? And what kind of time commitment do you have? Most producers don't go into it that way. They say, oh, I've got some maple trees out there, I want to tap them. And they get into it kind of backwards. Better off think about what you want to make. How much syrup do you want to produce in that first year and maybe in the third and fifth year? And this is kind of taking this discussion in a little different direction because this is something no one told me when I started out. Yes, I was third generation, and yes, I spent some time in school, not nearly as much as Jesse, but I spent enough time there. Most of my maple knowledge came from experience. And this part, no one sat me down and talked about. But if you're thinking about doing this, even if it's a hobby, but maybe a little bit of a business, or I heard some people raise their hand about going another step, these are things that you need to just think about and actually plan. What is your vision or your goal for this project? Your production plans and your timeline. It doesn't happen overnight. All too often I hear about today, people are making money when they're tapping lots of trees, when they're putting out 15, 20,000 taps. And producers think they can get into this and go to that number the first year. And I can assure you that 99% of them fail. So think of your timeline. Zoning. I sit on a local zoning committee. If you're going to do any construction in almost any place in the United States today, you need to talk to your zoning people and get that permit and get it before you start, or you will be in trouble. And that's even for the pump stations today. What are you going to make? What's your product line? Most of us start out making maple syrup and think that's the end of it, but that's not where the industry is really going. The industry is going with, first off, maple candy. I mean, that's something you can take and you can eat immediately, whereas maple syrup you have to take home and cook. Less and less people like to do that. They want to take it and use it, usually immediately. So maple candy, maple cream, maple butter, maple popcorn, all those things is where our industry is going. And it's many of those things that you can do. What are your marketing plans? Are you going to just give it away? And there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of people do it. They just make a little bit for their family and their friends, and that's great. I'm not saying you shouldn't. But if you're going to make a little more than that, as we all do because we tap a few more trees every year, what are you going to do with the product? Then set up a financial plan, because when you come home and start telling your spouse or significant other that you spent some money, and it takes money to get into it, you ought to have a little bit of a financial plan. So what are your projected expenses? First off, your equipment and your supplies. Talk to a salesman like me or someone else and find out what kind of costs are involved for where you want to go with your bush. What are your capital investments? Do you already own the land, or are you just thinking about this? Labor costs, this is a biggie. Availability. Unless you have the children like Jesse, you got to think about where you're going to get your help. It's not an easy thing to do, to go out there today and find help. And what is your expected yield? That's important, because you need to know that in order to project your income. If you're going to spend this huge amount of money, you probably want to hope for a return on it. So your income comes from your sales of your product, whatever that is. It also comes from tax advantages. If you're one of these people that are out there working for an hourly wage or a salary, you're getting hit pretty hard with taxes. If you start a little business, there's a lot of expense there that's going to help your taxes. That's one way. The second way that you can get a huge tax advantage in Wisconsin, I don't think this is true in Michigan, but in Wisconsin, if you're tapping the trees in a forest, it now becomes agriculture. It's no longer recreational property, and the savings are phenomenal. And then figure out what your profit projections are so you can finish your business plan. First off, your sugar bush, are you going to purchase it or lease it? We are leasing a little bit. Most of it is owned. And I will share with you that the amount that is paid per tap on a lease varies drastically. There are a lot of people paying as little as a gallon of syrup for God knows how many trees. And dollar-wise, there's some people getting away with 50 cents a tap. We're paying $1 a tap, and we also require a 10-year contract. If you're going to set up tubing, you need to set it up for a period of time, and most producers look at 10 years for a lifespan of a tubing system. Okay, sugar house construction or remodel. Most hobby producers, no, I shouldn't put it that way. Many hobby producers have a building on their property. Oh, I'm going to put my cooker in there and I'm going to do this and it'll be fine and it'll be cheap. Whether it's fine or not, it might be, but it's never cheap. It always costs money because you want to make it clean on the inside, and you need to get the steam out, you need to get the smoke out. So think about that cost. What is your tapping and your sap collection costs? Jesse gave you a few ideas earlier. Costs on tubing, I'm sure he'll be sharing that. But I have found that it varies drastically on tubing costs. There are people that are getting away with $3 a tap. And if you want to put in a super good system with dry lines that's going to give you the highest production, you're probably going to spend $15 a tap. Storage tanks, sap storage tanks, quality, just mentioned that already. What about a reverse osmosis machine? I'll be talking about that this afternoon. If you want to take this to another level, reverse osmosis is an intelligent way to do it. My theory is reverse osmosis does not make you money, it saves you time. You make your money out in the woods by how you collect your sap. Evaporator equipment, figure out what kind you're going to do and get the cost there. Filtering system, most small producers use cloth filters, nothing wrong with that. As you grow, you get tired of it, very, very tired of it, and then you want to talk about a filter press. Measuring instruments, can't get along without those. Hydrometer isn't very expensive, but they're fragile, so buy two and buy a cup to put it into. Containers and labels, you got to do something with this product. please don't put it in an old pickle jar, because you've done all this work. Why do you want your maple syrup to taste like pickles? Sanitizer, that's becoming more and more important as our state inspectors are looking closer and closer at our industry. You can't get along without sanitizer. Marketing and advertising, if you're making more syrup than you can possibly give to your friends, then you need to think about how you're going to get rid of it. That always costs a little money. Bookkeeping, it's not free if you're setting up a business. Utilities, that's a major cost today. Fuel. Hobby producers have a tendency to tell me how much wood they've got on their property and there's no cost. Well, there's always time involved. Even with our property, there's God knows how many thousands of trees standing there, and they're dying all the time, and we're always thinning, and we're making all this firewood, but it's far from free. And today, fuel oil is relatively cheap. So a couple of years ago, we did what I said we would never do. We put in an oil-fired evaporator. Saves labor, and the wood now I burn in my house. Insurance. Can't get along without it. If anybody comes onto your property and falls down or trips without falling down, you're liable. You need insurance. If you're going to sell your product may never hurt anybody, but somebody may claim it did, and you need to be able to defend yourself. You need insurance. License. Depends on your state, but most people that are going to sell a product to someone else to resell need to be licensed. And then you have your labor cost. You know, even sometimes the kids are expensive because they require food and clothing. Okay, number of taps. How many taps are you going to do? You need to figure that out before you come in to talk to some of these salesmen like me. What's your goals? You're going to fill all those with syrup first year or third year, or are you only going to make 10 gallons? Figure that out in advance. Then what are you going to do to cook that sap and make it into syrup? There's nothing wrong with this system. There's still people doing it that way. My wife's grandmother moved from central Wisconsin to northern California in the 1940s. And after we got married, we would send some syrup to her, and we never heard much about it. We thought it was strange. Well, one time, she was almost 90 years old. She came to visit. It wasn't the last time, but this time I remember quite well. We were making syrup. She was sitting in the syrup house watching us, and it was towards the end of season. And I was cleaning that sludge out of a filter press. If you ever played with a filter press, you know there's sludge that comes out of there. End of season, it was dark. And she reached over with that sludge, took some on her finger, and said, "Oh, that's what maple syrup's supposed to taste like." Well, I was just, ugh, you shouldn't be eating that. It's mostly dirt, but it's got flavor. That stuff you send me has no flavor. I realized later that this is how she made syrup when she was a kid. And if you make syrup like that, you're going to get a lot of smoke and a lot of ash, and you're going to have an entirely different flavor than what most of us prefer. It's not wrong, it's just different. You can set up your own little arch, we call it, or stove with cement blocks. This one is lined with fire bricks. If you don't do that, those cement blocks will be shot in less than a year. But what I want you to notice is the smokestack on the back. The thing is getting that smoke away from the sap. If it all comes around, it's going to flavor your syrup and be extremely smoke flavored. A little bit of smoke isn't too bad, a lot is. Okay, this is a sketch of an evaporator. If you want to move to the next step, you're going away from the flat pans that were on that cement block frame, you go to an evaporator. And you can see smokestack on this end, fire on that end, and the sap is moving through all those different channels in the pan, or pans plural. The height of that unit, because as these evaporators get more efficient, one thing they do is often set a second pan on top of the first pan, inject air, and you get twice the evaporation rate because you've got two big pans there evaporating. You need a huge headspace or a high ceiling in order to do that. So if you're thinking you might someday actually expand, so you need to get a more efficient evaporator, plan in advance and put a high ceiling in your building. Okay, sizing your equipment. And I think I'm finally getting to it, Darren. Just took a little long. If you're running flat pans on that homemade arch or a nice fancy arch that I'm happy to sell you, if you got a pan that measures 2 by 4 or preferably a couple of smaller pans that equal 2 by 4 when you put them together, best you're going to do is evaporating 10 gallons of sap an hour. So when you think about that tree out there that on an average day, on an average run is giving you a gallon of sap per tap, this unit isn't going to handle many taps. And most people that buy those end up working lots and lots of hours. Again, that's okay, just plan on it. A 2 by 6 flat pan or series of pans that equals 2 by 6 will evaporate 15 gallons of sap in an hour. Again, that's if you got a good stove underneath, contain the heat, and using it, not letting it escape out the sides. Evaporators. And there are so many evaporators on the market today, and they vary in efficiency tremendously, and also in price. It just kind of works together. But if you're starting out with a basic, extremely basic 2 by 6 evaporator, wood in this end, a few flues in one of the pans. By flues, I mean those corrugations. That's what's giving you more surface space. And it's the surface space that gives you the evaporation rate. That's all it is on a basic evaporator. Nothing high tech there, no fancy math. But a basic 2 by 6 evaporator will give you 25 to 30 gallons of evaporation per hour. 2 by 8 goes up to 35 to 40. 3 by 10, 96, 414, 180. And there's lots of other sizes, but you get the drift. Now that bottom line has to do with the more efficient, or probably some of the most efficient evaporators on the market. Again, there's lots of layers of efficiency out there. You can buy a little 2 by 6 unit that will evaporate 75 gallons per hour. So you don't need a huge footprint, and it has to do with a couple of pans, flue pans, one on top of the other, forced air into that top flue pan so it evaporates at a lower temperature. But it's amazing what those evaporators will produce. And 2 by 8, 136, 3 by 10, 275, 4 by 14, 520. You can achieve that even with wood-fired units. There's one on the market now that you actually fire it on the side instead of in the front, like most of us are used to, and it has 2 fire chambers. So you open up one to throw in your wood, the other one is still heating and evaporating that sap, and you have a constant evaporation rate. All other evaporators, when they have the fire chamber in front, even if there's 2 doors and you fire one at a time, you know what happens when you put the wood in? The boil just goes just like that. You close the door and the boil comes right up. So you're losing that efficiency. So this one unit this one type that's on the market today is achieving some of these high numbers simply because there's 2 fireboxes. Oil evaporation will give you about the same rate as that bottom line if you go with the high-tech everything along the way. I'm not going to talk much about pricing because prices vary all over the place. It depends on the producer, how efficient they want to be, how much you want to do in an hour or in a day, or some people only cook a couple of weekends. That's how you have to think about this. How many trees? Gallons. Gallons first, then trees, and what you're going to do and how you're going to evaporate it. And finally, a little bit on reverse osmosis. Again, I'll talk a lot about that this afternoon. Those are just a series of machines. They're not very intimidating. Well, they are when you first start, but they really aren't because there's really 2 valves. And with those valves, on most machines, you can set your pressure and therefore your concentrate level. So you can develop what percentage concentrate you want coming out, and the water is going the other way. That's all it is, 2 little valves to play with. So we've got buckets, we've got bags that most people are using that are getting away from the buckets. And then we have tubing, and I know this is what a lot of people think of when they think of tubing. They think of this squirrel's nest and what am I going to do? But really, it should look more like that and that with a main line. Back to sugar houses, which is my focus. Here's a nice little one that was being put up just for a small flat pan evaporator. You'll notice the cupola on top. Almost every picture that you find anywhere, they have the little cupola on top, and that pretty much tells people that's a sugar house. And it's really cute, but it's worthless other than for aesthetics. Because when you're getting that steam away from your pan, if you do it this way, like it was done in the old days, it won't be many years and your roof will rot off and it'll actually fall in. You need to have a hood over that and a pipe out. And if you put the cupola there, then just end the pipe right next to it. Another example of a cute little sugar house for the hobbyist. You notice the cupola on top. The other thing is the wood to the side. It's functional. This one's getting a little bit bigger. What I want to point out here is his sap holding tank. Hopefully it's on the north side and in the shade, but you really can't tell. What bothers me is that there's only one holding tank. Regardless of your size, you need at least 2 tanks to hold the sap. So as you're draining one out and cooking the sap. When it gets empty, you can clean it, be cooking from the second tank, and start filling the first tank. All too often, people have one tank, and it doesn't get cleaned because they're always adding sap and taking some out. Here's even a nicer looking one. Again, the end that's open, you've got a place to store your wood. What I will warn you is there are more municipalities and licensing organizations that are concerned if they see the wood that close to the evaporator. Lord knows, I don't know what it could hurt, but for some reason today, it's becoming an issue that you don't want it stored close to the evaporator. And from a licensing standpoint, that doesn't make sense. Here's the diagram of, or the floor plan of that last screen. The bigger room there should be for the evaporator. The little bitty room kind of in the middle, but on that side, that's the bathroom, something that's very necessary. I know the inspectors in Wisconsin are now demanding that. In the past, you know, if the syrup producer was neat and they didn't see evidence of the syrup producer being a pig, there was no problem. Today there is. You may have an outhouse, but they really are hoping you have this. It's very difficult. It takes more cost in that construction, but that's the way the industry is going and the licensing is going. The other thing we need in Wisconsin is running water and 3-basin sinks and drain boards and all that kind of stuff. It's hard to do in a sugar house. Generally, they're not heated year-round, but it's something that we have to consider and live with today. Over on this side's just an extra, well, there's one little room, there's just a table for eating, but you could use that for your bottling room, I would assume. And then on this far right is a storage room. Something that has to be considered. Most of those little sugar houses I was showing you, they hadn't thought about most of that, especially the storage. Here's the inside of one of those little ones. Looks cute. It's very functional. If you don't get any larger, it should work just fine. As a wise man once said, it was Jesse's dad, there are two kinds of sugar houses in this world. Those that have burned and those that are going to burn. So plan again, plan ahead. A lot of sugar houses have burned. Doesn't have to happen, but be careful. Filtering. The easiest way is to use these cloth filters. The heavy Orlon on the outside, the poly pre-filter on the inside. Filter presses start out with a hand press like this, and that's roughly spending $1,000. I get hugs every year from people that come in and say, thank you for selling me that filter press. Why didn't you do that earlier? Because it saves a lot of aggravation. Here's one a little bigger. You don't have to stand there and do it by hand. You're going to be spending $1,500, depending on the pump, $1,500 to $1,800. Nah, that'll be more like $2,000. That's a bigger one. Bottling your product. This is just showing grades. I believe very strongly in grading syrup, so you're telling your customer what to expect. If they come and they buy your product one year and they really love it because you gave them amber rich, when they come back the next year, they should know what grade they bought so they could ask for it again. Because if you give them very dark strong, the second year, they're going to be disappointed. The other thing that grading helps is you can often sell more than one container at a time because they'll say, gee, I don't know which one I want. Well, try this one and try this one. Okay. So, of all the things I talked about, these people didn't hear any of it. You know, where's their wood? Right next to the evaporator. You always need a little bit there, but you don't want to store it there. Where's their SERP storage? Right next to the evaporator, not where it belongs. You need to store that someplace else. The machine in the back end there looks like a reverse osmosis machine. Shouldn't be that close to the evaporator. It should be in its own room. Lots of things done incorrectly here. And I happen to end with that same photo that Jesse started with, so I guess we are kind of going full circle. I found this online last night. I didn't get it direct. It's really a neat photo. So, questions? And I know I talked faster than I thought I would.
What's the cost of one of those, like the smaller evaporator versus the flat pan, like a 2x6 evaporator?
Cost of a 2x6 evaporator, as I said earlier, huge variations. You can get a really nice, efficient one for around $8,000, and you can get a basic evaporator, 2 pans, one with flues, one with flat, for between $3,000 and $4,000. And you can get a 2x6 stove with a couple of flat pans on for around $2,000. Okay?
Now, there's also additional costs with those evaporators. You also have to line it with brick, correct?
You have to line it, and many people are only lining with fire brick. That was the old way of doing it. Fire brick is a great conductor of heat. So if you do that, pretty soon the outside of that stove, if it's stainless, is going to turn black, and if it's galvanized, you're going to burn the galvanizing off. My opinion is you're much better off using insulation board or blanket, which is used in commercial boilers. Easy to cut, easy to install, but it's soft. So then you use just the thin fire brick, those 1¼ inch ones, up by the grates to protect the boiler insulation from the firewood. And you've got a much better system.
Does that insulation last?
If you don't bang it up with the firewood, it'll last for years and years and years. Yep. And depending on the evaporator, if you go back to his 2x6, you'll be spending $150 to $200. Okay? Darren, I think we're done. One question?
So, you probably had it in your presentation here, but maybe I missed it. So, say you're starting out and you have 40, 50 taps. How much syrup can you expect to produce from that?
How much syrup can you expect from 40 or 50 taps? The average, historically, any of the books will tell you the average production is a quart of syrup per tap. With good vacuum systems, we're raising that. 1/3 of a gallon is becoming more the norm. But if you're a hobby producer not wanting to get into all the bells and whistles, think more of a quart. And that's if you gather all the sap all season long and cook it down. If you're a weekend warrior where you live in Illinois and cook in the UP a couple weekends out of the year, you're not going to produce that because you're not there.